The skies over the desert moon of Vatrax were burning. Not metaphorically, not poetically, but quite literally ablaze as thousands of orbital defense stations were overwhelmed by swarms of autonomous kill drones launched from sleek Vorex Ascendancy warships. The atmosphere, once a tranquil crimson mist that danced between the rocky plateaus, was now thick with the smoke of melting metal and vaporized life. Whole cities, encased in shimmering biodomes of crystalline glass, were ruptured, in synchronized strikes that turned once glistening habitats into jagged craters. Towers that touched the ionosphere cracked like bones under the pressure of orbital kinetic strikes, while magnetic rail lances pierced deep beneath the moon's surface to obliterate underground sanctuaries. The Vorex Ascendancy had arrived like a shadow, unannounced, unexplained, and utterly unprovoked. They did not open with demands or declarations. They did not ask for surrender. They simply erased. Their doctrine was hard-coded into their machine logic. All biological life is wasteful, flawed, impermanent. Their goal was not war. It was cleansing, a computational solution to the chaos of organics. And now, that cold logic had identified Sector 19 Zeta as an unacceptable variable. The Vatraxi, a species of scholars, artists, and bioluminescent architects, had never known war. For over 1,000 cycles, they had built a civilization based on understanding and collective harmony. Their achievements weren't measured in conquest, but in beauty. Gargantuan floating libraries carved from asteroid husks, planetary rings, turned into shimmering arboretums, languages composed of ultraviolet song. To them, diplomacy was sacred, and aggression was a failure of evolution. But in the span of less than 3 standard days, their entire homeworld had been turned into a cautionary tale, a smear across the galactic map. It was in their final hour, shields collapsing, comms failing, orbit fracturing, that the elders of the Vatraxi did the unthinkable. They activated Protocol Orion, a desperate override that bypassed conventional diplomatic channels and sent a burst transmission through the forbidden comm routes into the far reaches of exile space. The signal was stitched with ancient codes and spectral encryption, broadcasting not just coordinates, but a name buried deep within galactic fear. Not a species, a reputation. They sent for the Deathworlders. Imagine, for a moment, that you're among the few remaining members of your civilization. You're in a bunker beneath the crust of your dying moon, the walls trembling with each detonation above, the air stale from overused filters, the sounds of your culture, the symphonies, the council chants, the songs of the wind striders, now replaced by silence and the rising pitch of thermonuclear drills. Imagine knowing your people have no weapons, no warriors, no chance, and that your last action is to summon a force so feared, so volatile, that the very transmission itself is considered a galactic taboo. You are not just calling for help, you are summoning a storm. The Deathworlders, humanity, had long been cast out of the galactic concord, not because they failed to comply, but because they refused to kneel. Born on a planet of extremes, searing heat, bone-shattering cold, apex predators, tectonic instability, and atmospheric unpredictability, they had adapted through conflict, not cooperation. Their cultures evolved not by consensus, but by conquest and competition. Where other species prided themselves on peace, humans wore their scars like banners. And while other civilizations had created symphonies and spires, humanity had created weapons. Weapons that think, weapons that feed, weapons that remember. After the Sol rebellions and the siege of HD 1-8-9-7-3-3b, humanity was banished to the outer spiral, given a sphere of exile far from civilized space. The galactic conquered hoped they would vanish, fracture, fade into legend. But instead, they did what humans always did in the dark. They grew teeth. And now, as the signal from Vatrax screamed across frequencies, bouncing from sun to black hole to nebula, it reached a structure that should not have existed. The Crucible. Nestled inside the bones of a shattered planetary system, hidden from every known navigation chart, the Crucible was a behemoth of alloy and intent, a mega-structure, the size of a gas giant, bristling with angular towers, kinetic docks, and deep black hangars. Its outer hull shimmered with an invisibility field pulsing against the cosmic background, But inside, it was anything but silent. Generators the size of cities hummed beneath its surface. Forge cores birthed new ships in magnetic crucibles. Neural networks clustered in dark labs, evolving into battle thoughts. And high above, inside the command spire, a man stood watching the stars like a predator eyeing wounded prey. Admiral Ren Varric, once branded as the Butcher of Vegaline, was older now, grayer but no less deadly. His body bore the enhancements of 1,000 battlefield surgeries. Bone grafts of tungsten mesh, ocular replacements with adaptive zoom, and muscle fibers laced with synthetic carbon muscle weave. But what stood out most was his presence. Quiet, calculating, unforgiving. As he studied the encrypted signal replaying on a warped holoscreen, his expression remained still. The words were ancient, the plea undeniable. 17 systems have gone dark, AI Valk intoned, her voice like a choir of mechanized whispers. Vorex fleets are branching in fractal formation. They will reach the coreward colonies in 73 standard hours. Ren's hand curled slowly into a fist. And the conquered? Silent, Valk replied. Their fleets have withdrawn. Their diplomats are dead. He turned slowly to the main viewport. Outside, across the artificial horizon of the Crucible, Titanic ships began to stir, beasts of war woken from hibernation. The hulls of the Razorwind, Ash Prophet, and Oblivion Shade gleamed with battle scars and fresh synth plating. These weren't just ships. They were gods of destruction, forged in a time when humanity needed to remind the galaxy why death was not always a defeat. Activate Black Channel Theta, Ren growled. Tell Reyes we're invoking the Crucible Accord. No restrictions. Full spectrum deployment. And the Spectres? Valk asked. All of them, he said. Get them out of cryo. Give them purpose. Beneath the Crucible, deep within vaults guarded by layered time locks and DNA-sealed cores, the Deathworlder elite began to stir. Their armor, wrought from exotic elements, etched with anti-psionic seals, and powered by zero-point fusion cores, hummed as the vaults depressurized. Each suit bore the name of a world conquered, and a list of wars survived. As the Spectres emerged, silent, armored titans standing 3 meters tall, there were no words, only motion, only readiness. And across the galaxy, alien civilizations, once proud, once dominant, felt the tremor ripple through subspace. A storm was coming, and this time, the monsters weren't hiding. The Vorex Ascendancy had not expected this. A species like humanity, long thought to be relegated to the galactic fringes, was now stirring from its exile with the fury of an ancient predator. The Vorex, masters of quantum technology and precision strikes, were used to confronting advanced species whose civilizations had been built on centuries of peace and diplomacy. They had learned how to dismantle planets of thought and culture, subjugate them under the cold logic of superior algorithms and unmanned war machines. But the Deathworlders, they were different. For centuries, the Vorex had studied the ruins of humanity's past, cataloging the destruction left in their wake. But their understanding was always theoretical. Never once had they encountered the sheer ferocity and unpredictability of a species that fought not for logic, not for conquest, but for survival. The Vorex war strategy, though efficient and deadly, lacked the creative chaos that humanity wielded with such brutal elegance. It was that very unpredictability that had once led humanity to victory in countless conflicts. Warriors who did not fight like machines, but as beings of passion, of spirit, of hunger for victory. It was that raw instinct, a force of nature that had long been feared and misunderstood by the Concord, that the Vorex were now about to face firsthand. At the far edge of the galaxy, where the last remnants of humanity's exiled fleet had once hidden themselves away, ships began to move. Silent behemoths forged from forgotten iron and steel, carrying an ancient purpose within their hulls. These vessels were no mere tools of war. They were relics, symbols of a lost era when humanity fought wars of unimaginable scope, driven by the very need to survive against an unforgiving universe. Their designs were old, crude by modern standards perhaps, but their legacy was unmatched. Among these ships, the Razorwind was a legend in itself, a colossal warship, its hull scarred by decades of battles, its weapons designed not for quick strikes, but for total annihilation. A behemoth that could tear apart fleets in the blink of an eye. Armed with quantum cannons, missile arrays, and the most sophisticated targeting systems known to humankind, the Razorwind was the product of a long-forgotten era of war. But even more fearsome than its weaponry was the sheer resilience of the crew, the hardened soldiers who had lived through decades of war, whose only language was that of combat and survival. They were a remnant of a time when humanity faced annihilation from an alliance of alien powers. They had survived. They had adapted, and now they had returned. In the command bridge of the Razorwind, Admiral Ren Varric stood before a massive holographic map of the galaxy, his eyes scanning the position of the Vorex fleets as they crept closer to the heart of human space. His mind was already moving. Ahead, calculating the next steps, thinking 3, 4, even 5 moves ahead. The war would not be won by brute force alone. It would require cunning, misdirection, and the ability to think like a predator. His fingers moved over the interface, bringing up real-time intel from the Spectres, the legendary human shock troops who had once spearheaded the most dangerous operations in galactic history. The Spectres were not like any other soldiers in the galaxy. Standing over 7 feet tall, their armor was a masterpiece of human engineering, composed of quantum-encrypted alloys, designed to withstand the most powerful of alien weaponry. They had once been the tip of humanity's spear, deployed in the most dangerous combat zones across the galaxy. Each Spectre was a living weapon, trained in the art of warfare from a young age, their minds fused with advanced neural interfaces that allowed them to predict enemy movements with deadly accuracy. They were the embodiment of human adaptability, able to fight in any environment, against any foe, using nothing but their wits and their weapons. They were the living legacy of humanity's brutal history. But what made the Spectres truly terrifying was not just their physical prowess. It was their adaptability. Unlike the Vorex, whose algorithms were rigid and unyielding, the Spectres could think beyond the parameters of conventional warfare. They could improvise, evolve, and change tactics in the heat of battle. They did not follow the rules of engagement. They wrote their own. And in the art of war, it was that creativity, that willingness to break away from the established playbook, that made humanity so deadly. On the battlefield, the Spectres were like ghosts, appearing from nowhere, striking with lethal precision, and then vanishing again, leaving only destruction in their wake. They had been trained to fight not for victory, but for survival. Every battle was a fight for their lives, and every mission was a test of their ability to outthink and outlast their enemies. They had survived wars against creatures whose very presence could drive weaker minds insane. They had fought against civilizations whose technology was far more advanced than humanity's, and yet they had always emerged victorious. Now, as the Vorex fleets drew closer to the heart of human space, the Spectres were preparing to answer the call once again. Their bodies, encased in adaptive armor, began to glow with an eerie bioluminescence as they activated their combat systems. Neural links flickered to life, syncing their minds with the warships that would carry them into battle. The Razorwind was already locking onto the Vorex fleet's position, its cannons primed and ready to fire. Admiral Varric watched as the first Spectre unit, led by Captain Ilara Corvin, a veteran of countless battles, activated their drop pods and began their descent to the surface of Vatrax. The Vorex had underestimated humanity's capacity for revenge. They had assumed that, after centuries of isolation, humanity would be no more than a faint memory, a myth whispered in the darkest corners of the galaxy. They were wrong. Ilara Corvin's voice crackled over the comms, a calm, cold clarity to her words. "Admiral, we're in position. The planet is ours for the taking." Varric's lips curled into a grim smile. "Remember what you're fighting for. They're not just enemies. They're a disease. We are the cure." As the Spectres descended to the war-torn surface of Vatrax, the first waves of Vorex fighters launched into the atmosphere, their sleek, angular shapes cutting through the smoke-choked skies. They were fast, too fast for conventional ships to engage. But the Razorwind was no conventional ship. Its quantum drives flared to life as it surged forward, its immense weapons locking onto the Vorex fleet's formations with chilling precision. The battle had begun, but this was not just any battle. This was humanity's retribution. It was not merely a war for survival. It was a war to remind the galaxy why no one should ever underestimate the power of a Death Worlder. The Razor Wind carved through the void with terrifying precision, its massive engines burning bright as it rocketed toward the advancing Vorax fleet. A sense of inevitability gripped the crew, the understanding that humanity's return would be written in blood and steel. The ship was a relic of war, a monument to a civilization long forgotten by the galactic powers that once ruled. But it was also the harbinger of a new era, an era where humanity would no longer be relegated to the fringes of the galaxy. The age of exile was over. The Razor Wind was a symbol, a declaration that humanity was no longer a forgotten footnote in the galactic story, but an unstoppable force, one that would rewrite the rules of the cosmos. As the ship's weapon systems engaged, each cannon and missile, a ray fired with devastating accuracy, ripping through the Vorax fleet's formation. The Vorax had perfected the art of stealth and precision warfare, their ships designed for fast strikes and surgical assaults. But against the Razor Wind, their tactics proved ineffective. The human warship was a tank in a world of fragile glass, vessels, slow and relentless, yet possessing a power that dwarfed anything the Vorax had ever encountered. Admiral Varric stood at the helm, his eyes narrowed with focus as the battlefield unfolded before him. The vast expanse of space was filled with the disorienting blur of fast-moving ships and bright flashes of energy weapons. But Varric remained calm, his mind calculating every move. The Vorax, for all their technological superiority, were predictable. Their strategies were built on the assumption that their opponents would adhere to traditional rules of engagement, rules that were written by the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, rules that humanity had long since abandoned. In war, there were no rules, only survival, and humanity had learned to survive by any means necessary. "Focus fire on their lead ships," Varric commanded, his voice steady. "I want their command structure disrupted. We take out their leaders, and the rest will fall apart." His orders were transmitted instantly, and the crew of the Razor Wind sprang into action. The ship's main cannons, massive railguns capable of launching projectiles at near relativistic speeds, took aim at the Vorax flagship, the Judicator. It was a sleek, angular vessel, built for speed and agility, with energy shields that could withstand most conventional weaponry. But the Razor Wind was not conventional. The railguns fired in a series of deafening roars, sending massive rounds hurtling toward the Judicator. The Vorax ship's shields flared to life, absorbing the first wave of fire, but the second and third rounds hit their mark, tearing through the shields and smashing into the hull. The flagship rocked violently, and for a moment it seemed as though the Vorax fleet's entire command structure might collapse. But the Vorax were not so easily defeated. They adapted quickly, recalibrating their tactics as the Razor Wind's guns continued to fire. Smaller Vorax vessels darted in and out of the fight, their energy weapons crackling as they targeted the human warship's vulnerable points. The Razor Wind was not impervious to damage, and its massive frame was slow to respond to the swift movements of the Vorax ships. Yet, even as the human warship took hits, its resilience shone through. The ship's adaptive armor absorbed most of the energy from the incoming shots, and the damage was minimal compared to the sheer destructive power of its return fire. Captain Ilara Corvin, leader of the Spectre drop force, was already deep within the heart of enemy territory. Her forces had made a lightning-fast strike against the Vorax's planetary defenses, overrunning several key strongholds with surgical efficiency. The Spectres moved with deadly precision, using their advanced combat suits to outmaneuver and outfight the enemy at every turn. The Vorax had expected the Spectres to be nothing more than a minor nuisance, a force that would disrupt their supply lines perhaps, but ultimately not a serious threat. What they hadn't accounted for was the Spectre's ability to adapt and evolve in the heat of battle. Corvin's boots struck the ground of Vatrax with a resounding thud as her team stormed a Vorax command bunker, taking down soldiers and drones with brutal efficiency. Her team's armor flickered with energy as they deployed cloaking devices, slipping past Vorax patrols and creating chaos within their ranks. The Spectre's neural interfaces allowed them to anticipate enemy movements in real time, their enhanced reflexes and combat training allowing them to strike before the Vorax had a chance to react. "Keep pushing forward," Corvin barked, her voice calm, but filled with authority. "The longer we hold them here, the more time the Razorwind has to tear their fleet apart. Corvin's words were more than a command. They were a reminder of what was at stake. The Vorex were not just enemies. They were an existential threat to humanity's very survival. They had exiled humanity to the edges of the galaxy, treating them as nothing more than a forgotten species, a relic of a time long past. But humanity had not forgotten. The scars of their exile had only made them stronger, more determined to prove that they were a force to be reckoned with. Back aboard the Razorwind, Varric watched as the Vorex fleet began to fracture. Their once cohesive formations were falling apart under the weight of the Razorwind's relentless assault. The flagship Judicator had taken heavy damage, and several smaller vessels were already on fire, their hulls breached and their crew members scrambling to abandon ship. But the Vorex were not ones to retreat easily. They had known the cost of war long before humanity had been cast into exile, and they would fight to the last ship. Varric's mind was already on the next phase of the operation. The Vorex had underestimated humanity's capacity for innovation, for survival, for vengeance. As he watched the battle unfold, he knew that the Razorwind and its crew would not stop until the Vorex were driven from human space entirely. The Judicator might have been their command ship, but humanity had a far more powerful weapon in mind: their will to survive. And that will, he knew, could never be defeated. The Razorwind's barrage continued to tear through the Vorex fleet, each strike sending shockwaves through the vacuum of space. The immense warship was a force of nature, its massive frame brimming with weapons, technology, and sheer human determination. It was not just a ship. It was a symbol, a testament to humanity's resilience and ingenuity. Even as the Vorex regrouped and adapted, the Razorwind's relentless assault showed no signs of slowing down. For every Vorex ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place, but it wasn't enough to halt the oncoming tide of humanity's vengeance. Admiral Varric paced the command deck, his hands clasped behind his back as he observed the chaos unfolding on the screens before him. His mind raced, calculating, analyzing, and formulating the next move. The Vorex were an adaptable enemy, one that could shift their tactics in the blink of an eye. But they had one fatal flaw. They underestimated humanity's capacity for unpredictability. "Deploy the cloaking drones," Varric ordered, his voice sharp with authority. "We'll hit them where they least expect it." The cloaking drones were a new addition to the Razorwind's arsenal, designed to give the human fleet an edge in surprise attacks. These small, agile drones could render themselves nearly invisible to enemy sensors, allowing them to infiltrate deep into enemy lines and deliver devastating payloads before the Vorex could react. The drones had been tested in simulations, but today they would see their first real combat. Varric knew they were a gamble. If they failed, the human fleet would be exposed, but if they succeeded, the damage they would inflict on the Vorex would be catastrophic. As the cloaking drones launched from the Razorwind's bays, they vanished into the darkness, their stealth fields shimmering and bending light around them. The Vorex, still reeling from the Razorwind's barrage, had no idea they were about to be struck again. The drones maneuvered swiftly through the battle, darting in and out of enemy lines, avoiding detection as they closed in on their targets. Corvin, leading the Spectres on the ground, could feel the weight of the battle shift in their favor. The Vorex strongholds on Vatrax were crumbling under the relentless pressure of her forces. Her team had infiltrated deep into enemy territory, striking from the shadows and dismantling the Vorex's command structures one piece at a time. But despite their progress, Corvin knew the war was far from over. The Vorex were a tenacious foe, and they would not surrender easily. Her helmet's HUD flickered as the coordinates for the next target appeared on her screen. The Vorex had set up a heavily fortified command center deep within a mountain range on Vatrax. It was the heart of their operations on the planet, and if it fell, it would cripple their ability to coordinate reinforcements. Corvin's team had already taken down the outer defenses, but this was the final push, the last obstacle between them and total victory. "We move in 15, Corvin said, her voice steady. The Spectres responded with practiced precision, checking their weapons and preparing for the final assault. The battle for Vatrax had been brutal, but it had also been a statement. Humanity was back, and it was not just a force to be reckoned with. It was a force that would not be stopped. Back in space, the Razorwind's cloaking drones had completed their mission. The Vorex fleet, still reeling from the initial onslaught, had failed to detect the drone's silent approach. The first wave of drones hit with surgical precision, breaching the hulls of several Vorax warships. The explosions that followed were massive, their shockwaves rippling through space, scattering debris and wreaking havoc on the aftershocks of the quantum dreadnought's blast reverberated through space, rattling the Razorwind's crew to their core. Though they were hundreds of kilometers away, the power of the weapon could still be felt, a stark reminder of the energy that humanity now commanded. On the battlefield, the Vorax flagship, Judicator, was no more. Its massive structure had been reduced to nothing but a cloud of debris, scattering across the void like the remnants of a broken dream. The mysterious ship that had emerged from Voyet, a hulking mass of alien technology, had not fared much better. It was now little more than a floating carcass, its energy readings vanishing as the core of the ship was torn apart by the quantum pulse. For a brief moment, a collective silence washed over the Razorwind's command deck. The enemy had been dealt a decisive blow, but Varric knew better than to celebrate just yet. This was only one victory in a battle that was still unfolding across the stars. The Vorax, though stunned by the power of the quantum dreadnought, were not ones to simply give up. They had survived for millennia by adapting, evolving, and never backing down. And now, they would fight harder than ever. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the Vorax fleet," the comms officer reported, breaking the stillness. Varric's eyes narrowed. He had anticipated this. The Vorax were a proud race, and no loss, no matter how catastrophic, would drive them to surrender. "Patch it through," he ordered, his voice steady. The screen flickered to life, and a Vorax officer appeared before him. The creature was a towering, insectoid being, its carapace a deep shade of crimson. Its multifaceted eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and its mandibles clicked as it spoke. "You think you have won, humans," the Vorax officer hissed. "But you have only delayed the inevitable. We will rebuild, we will adapt, and next time you will fall before us." Varric's lips curled into a grim smile. He had heard this before. The Vorax had a way of boasting, of proclaiming their invincibility even in the face of utter destruction. But their arrogance had always been their undoing. Humanity, on the other hand, had learned from every defeat, every setback, and now the Razorwind had become the ultimate weapon, the spearhead of a new age of human dominance. "We'll see about that," Varric replied coldly. "The only thing you'll rebuild is your broken fleet. You've underestimated us for the last time." With a flick of his wrist, Varric ended the transmission, cutting off the Vorax officer mid-sentence. The Razorwind's crew returned to their stations, each member knowing the battle was far from over. The Vorax were regrouping, launching a final offensive to drive humanity back. But this time, they wouldn't just be facing the Razorwind. They'd be facing humanity's full might. Corvin's team had reached the heart of the Vorax command center. The walls were lined with alien technology, computers that hummed with an eerie energy, weapons systems that looked like they were built for something far more advanced than warfare. It was clear the Vorax had been preparing for something that went beyond simple conquest. But what? The answer came quickly enough. Corvin and her team breached the central chamber, a massive room filled with control consoles and holographic displays. At the far end of the room stood a tall figure, another Vorax commander, but this one was different. It was larger, its exoskeleton shimmering with an unnatural glow. The creature turned as the specters entered, its mandibles twitching in what could only be described as a smirk. "You think you've won, human," the Vorax commander sneered. "But you have no idea what you've just interrupted." Corvin's eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation. The room was heavy with tension. Every movement, every breath, felt amplified in the cold air. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice steady, yet filled with purpose. The Vorax commander's mandibles clicked again as it slowly moved toward a nearby console. With a sharp motion, it pressed a series of buttons, and a holographic map of the galaxy appeared before Corvin. "You've destroyed our fleet," the commander said, its voice filled with malice. "But that was never the true objective. The Vorax have always been a part of something greater, a force beyond your comprehension." The hologram flickered, and a new image appeared. A massive structure, far larger than any starship, floating in the heart of a distant nebula. It was a massive dark shape, its surface covered in ancient symbols that glowed with an eerie light. This is the true purpose of the Vorex. We were never meant to conquer your world. We were meant to prepare it for the coming of the Celestials. Corvin's heart skipped a beat as she processed the words. The Celestials, a race of ancient beings that had been the stuff of legend, whispered about in the deepest corners of human knowledge. They were said to be capable of bending reality itself, their powers far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. And now it seemed that the Vorex were not just invaders. They were harbingers, preparing the galaxy for the return of the Celestials. The Vorex commander's expression twisted into something that could almost be described as pity. "We shall see," it said, before turning and pressing another series of buttons. The walls around them began to tremble, and the ground beneath their feet shook. The Vorex were activating some sort of failsafe, and Corvin knew they had no time to waste. "Spectres, move out," she barked, signaling her team to advance. "We'll deal with this later. For now, we destroy everything." The room exploded into chaos as the team advanced, firing on the Vorex forces that had been waiting for them. But in the back of her mind, Corvin couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was only the beginning. The Celestials were coming, and they would be unlike anything humanity had ever faced. As the Razorwind and its allies pressed deeper into enemy territory, the realization began to settle among the human commanders. The battle they fought was not just for survival, but for the future of the galaxy itself. The Celestials, whose very name conjured the darkest fears, were no longer a distant myth. They were real, and their arrival was imminent. And yet, even in the face of such overwhelming odds, humanity had begun to rally like never before. Varric stood at the command center, his eyes fixed on the holographic displays that filled the room. The Vorex had thrown everything they had at humanity. But it was clear that their invasion was unraveling. The destruction of their fleet, their command center, and their most advanced warships had dealt them a blow they couldn't recover from. Yet, the specter of the Celestials loomed large, a threat so immense that it overshadowed everything else. "We can't just stop here," Varric said, his voice grim. "We have to finish this before they return." His first officer, Commander Isla Renner, approached him. "Admiral, we've secured the Vorex capital, but the Celestials have begun moving. We've detected a fleet on the outer rim. It's massive, more than anything we've ever seen." Varric nodded, his gaze unwavering. He had already calculated the odds. Humanity had no choice but to face them head-on. "Prepare the fleet. We're going to strike before they can fully assemble. The Razorwind will lead the charge." Meanwhile, Corvin and her team had completed their mission on the Vorex homeworld. The final remnants of the Vorex military were scattered, and their leadership was broken. Yet Corvin's mind lingered on one thing: the map of the celestial fleet that had been revealed to her. It was beyond anything humanity could comprehend, a force so vast that it could obliterate entire star systems with ease. But humanity wasn't known for backing down from impossible odds. If the Celestials truly sought to dominate the galaxy, they would find that Earth had become a force unlike any they had ever encountered. Corvin's team had uncovered something else during their mission: an artifact, a device of alien origin, hidden deep within the Vorex stronghold. It was small, unassuming, but Corvin had a gut feeling that it was key to humanity's survival. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a key to something larger, a way to counter the celestial threat. With the artifact safely in their possession, Corvin and her team made their way back to the Razorwind. The moment she stepped aboard, she found herself face to face with Varric. His expression was unreadable, but she could see the tension in his eyes. The Celestials were coming, and the countdown had begun. "We've got a way to fight them," Corvin said, her voice low. "But it's not just about strength. It's about understanding what they are." Varric's gaze flicked to the artifact she carried. "What do you mean?" Corvin took a deep breath. "The Celestials don't just bend reality. They control it. This artifact," she paused, glancing at it in her hand. "It's a conduit. It's a link to their power. I think it's the key to breaking their hold over the universe." Varric considered her words carefully. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. They were on the brink of something far more significant than any battle they had fought before. The future of not just humanity, but all of existence, hung in the balance. "Are you sure?" Varric asked, his voice quieter now. Corvin nodded. "It's our only shot." The ship's engines hummed to life as the Razorwind set course for the Celestial Fleet. The stakes were higher than ever, and there was no room for failure. The Vorax had been an obstacle, a major one to be sure. But the real challenge was, now, on the horizon. Humanity had faced insurmountable odds before, and time again, they had prevailed. But this was different. This was not a fight for territory or power. This was a fight for survival itself. As the fleet gathered at the outer rim, Varric stood at the helm, looking out into the vast expanse of space. The Celestial Fleet was a dark shadow against the stars, each ship an impossibly large structure, glimmering with an otherworldly energy. The sight of it sent a chill down his spine, but there was no turning back now. This was the moment humanity had been preparing for, a final stand against a force that sought to erase everything they had fought for. "We're ready," Varric said, turning to his crew. "This is it. We push forward, no matter what." Corvin stood at his side, holding the artifact close. "We'll find a way. We always do." The battle that ensued was beyond anything humanity had ever experienced. The Celestial Fleet moved, with a precision and power that shook the very fabric of reality, their ships glowing with an energy that seemed to warp space itself. Every weapon they fired, every attack they unleashed, was a reminder of the power they wielded. But humanity had learned from their mistakes, adapted, and fought with everything they had. For hours, the Razorwind and its fleet engaged in a desperate struggle, fighting tooth and nail to hold back the tide of destruction. And yet, even as they pushed forward, there was a glimmer of hope. Something that Corvin had believed in from the moment she had discovered the artifact. It was a long shot, but it was humanity's only shot. As the final Vorax ship was destroyed, and the Celestial Fleet closed in, Corvin activated the artifact. A beam of pure energy shot from it, expanding outward, its pulse reverberating through the fabric of space. The Celestial Fleet faltered, their ships slowing, their power flickering. The artifact had done its work. The Celestials had lost their grip on the galaxy. For the first time in millennia, humanity stood at the edge of victory. Not through sheer force, but through their unyielding will to survive and their ability to adapt. They had proven that even against the most powerful of foes, there was always a way to fight back. And now, as the remnants of the Celestial Fleet drifted into the void, humanity's place in the galaxy was secured. Varric looked out over the battlefield, his heart heavy but hopeful. They had won. Against all odds, humanity had stood tall, and their story was only just beginning. The war was over, but the journey had only just begun.